Bobby, Frank was talking about some different venues that, and I know we've talked in the last couple weeks, different locations and what has to happen in real life to play hockey. But what do you think, or what do you think would be ideal as far as venues or maybe places to do this?
Well, right now the NHL's got a list of 12 teams, 12 NHL cities that they're looking at as candidates to be. Well, they think they're probably going to do 4 if they get to that point. They might have to go to 2, but start with 4. And what they're trying to look for is obviously NHL rink, lots of hotel availability, lots of ability to try and lock this thing down as much as it humanly can be locked down in almost a biosphere type environment where you're not exposing too many people to too many things. And the 2 Canadian cities that are most often mentioned are Edmonton and Toronto. Toronto's got, just a wealth of arenas between Scotiabank Arena, the Ford Performance Center, which is the Leafs practice facility, Mattamy Athletic Center, which is the Maple Leaf Gardens that Ryerson uses as its athletic center now. You've got the
everywhere, Bobby. Vaughan, like it's
Coca-Cola Coliseum, where the Marlies play.
Yeah.
So there's just a ridiculous number of arenas in a very small geographic area that could be utilized. You've got nothing but hotel rooms available right now. So, could Toronto and Toronto, relatively speaking, while the Ontario numbers are still pretty high, my understanding is the City of Toronto numbers are much, much better. So anyways, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but the bottom line is there's 12 cities out there that are being vetted by the NHL. They think in a lot of cases it will be last-minute decisions as to which places are hot or which places are not. And all of this is contingent, obviously, on medical authorities, government authorities giving green lights. And what they're trying to do is they're looking at a phase-in. And right now we're in phase 1, which is lockdown, quarantine, nothing's happening. The next phase 2, would be players from all over the world, Europe, United States, Canada, have the ability, once they're given the green light by the medical authorities and by various levels of government, to travel to get back to their home city where their team plays. And when they do that, they would then have to be quarantined for 2 weeks within their group, which is to say that, not by themselves necessarily, but there'd be a high level of testing that would be available to all these NHL players. And the NHL is very optimistic that they would have the ability. There's lots of private companies now that are coming out with testing mechanisms. And I think the league really believes that if they were to pull this off, they'd have no problem testing every individual who's part of their personnel. So you would come back in phase 2, and you would be working out of training facilities in small groups to start. You could roll it out maybe a little bigger. There'd be on and off ice workouts, and there'd be that 2-week period where you basically get your group back together again in a protected team environment. And then if all goes well, then you would go to phase 3. And what phase 3 would be getting all these teams to the 4 locations that they've designated and getting them in there and having a training camp, 2 to 3 weeks, and do all of that. And if that 2 or 3 weeks went well, then you get to phase 4, and that is play games. And the phase 4 for the NHL is to play regular season games, and obviously they won't be the same regular season games that we saw before, because if they do this on the basis of the 4 divisions,
the schedule doesn't add up.
Right.
Schedule won't add up, but every team would try to get to 82 games. And this isn't a perfect world. And I realize there's a lot of skepticism about it. But you got to have a plan. And that's the NHL plan, is to get everybody to 82 games and then tell 15 teams, buzz off, go home, stay safe, and then have 2 rounds of the playoffs in those same 4 cities where nobody moves or travels or goes anywhere. And there may even be talk that instead of a wild card system, you might, and this is not firm by any stretch, but one of the things that's been unofficially talked about would be maybe get rid of the wild card format and just go strictly to the divisions. But in any case, you would have 2 rounds of playoffs in those 4 cities, in each of those 4 cities, and then you would probably scale it down and go to 2 cities or even 1 city once you go to the third round,
so
and try to get the whole thing played.
Just to follow up on that, Bob, and I know you said this by no means is a lock to happen, but it's being discussed. If they got rid of the wild card, would that suggest 4 teams from each division? In other words, the Leafs are a lock. They're in. Like, if that happens, they're in. They're not fighting with Florida because Montreal ain't catching them.
Basically, and this is where the grappler can't screw me over here. He can't radio me on this because when the general manager, I want to make it clear, the general managers had their call the other day, and nobody, there was not one word of this was spoken on the call to the general managers. But I can tell you that there have been a couple of club executives I've talked to who said that idea has been very informally, talked about amongst some people. Now, I got the same thing from the league. The league said hasn't been formally discussed, has not been planned or anything. So let's make that all abundantly clear. But it makes, this would be one of the contingencies that would make sense. If you're doing it on a divisional basis, and you've got the Atlantic in Toronto, and you've got the Pacific in Edmonton, and you've got the Central in Dallas, and you've got the Metro in Pittsburgh, when you finish the regular season, you don't necessarily want to have, you got to take a team from the Metro division and put them up with the Atlantic, and you got to take a team from the Atlantic and you got to move them over to the Metro, and now we got to move a team from the Pacific and get them to the Central, or vice versa.
Right.
That might not be practical. So if it's not, then it may be that you would go back to the divisional format. And you're absolutely right. And it doesn't take very much. Even I can figure out. I'm not that smart. And I looked at the standings for 2 seconds, and I'm like, that's really good news for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's even better news for the Florida Panthers.
Right.
It's really bad news for 1 or 2 teams in the Metro division who would cry foul and say, this is bogus.
Right.
On the Western side, it would be pretty good news for the Vancouver Canucks, and it would suck badly for the Nashville Predators or the Winnipeg Jets. So, as I say, nobody's saying we're doing that. It's just, loosely being talked about as that could be a contingency they might have to look at.